Hello and welcome to the BBC's News at 1 o'clock. It's farewell to Concorde today and the end of almost 3 decades of supersonic passenger travel. There was a mixture of sadness and celebration as the final Concorde flight took off from New York bound for Heathrow. Tens of thousands of people, fans of Concorde's beauty, speed and grace, are preparing to welcome her home for a grand reunion at Heathrow. 3 planes are taking part in Concorde's final countdown. The first took off from John F. Kennedy Airport bound for Heathrow Airport in the last hour. The second will depart from Edinburgh this afternoon. The third Concorde will leave Heathrow for a tour of the Bay of Biscay before returning. All 3 will land within minutes of each other at Heathrow at around 10 to 4 this afternoon. In a moment, we'll go live to Heathrow, where thousands of Concorde fans are waiting. But first, Jeremy Bowen reports from the Big Apple on the Big Bird's final flight across the Atlantic.
The last morning of Concorde's working life in the chill of New York's Kennedy Airport. Concorde was conceived in the 50s, developed in the 60s. It's been in service since 1976. It has no rival, and the thought of flying on it is still exciting. Stephen Best, a businessman from Durham, booked his ticket months before British Airways decided this would be Concorde's last day. David and Patty Hayes from Ohio paid $60,000 in a charity auction for their tickets.
Yes, I am.
They're the last paying passengers. Today, everyone else has been invited by British Airways.
The main purpose of this trip is business, and but as a coincidence, we're going to be part of a very historic moment, and we're very grateful for that opportunity.
Are you excited?
Yeah,
Me too.
I'm real excited.
Mr. and Mrs. Hayes had been planning to spend the money on a trip to Africa.
What's nice is our grandkids can look back someday, and our kids, and say, you know, Grandma and Grandpa had the last 2 seats on the Concorde, which is
exciting.
Yeah,
That's very exciting.
Tracy Percy and Claire Sullivan are stewardesses who, between them, have clocked up 16 years and thousands of flights on Concorde. Tracy, I've heard you talking about Concorde almost like it's a living creature.
She is. She's part of my family. We all talk about her as she. We'll miss her desperately.
The passengers were ferried out to the airport before dawn. Concorde made money, in the end, because it was sold as something exclusive for people for whom time mattered more than money.
Hello, Percy.
Hello, Percy.
Yeah.
Nice to see
you.
All is well?
This aircraft, more than anything, is about speed for businessmen, for celebrities, for anyone who could pay.
Good morning, my dear. How nice to see you.
Quite a few Concorde regulars are taking one last trip. So what's going to happen to your life when you have to spend 8 hours crossing the Atlantic?
I don't know. It's going to be hell.
I think anybody who does lots of trips between New York and London will miss it. It's a fantastic aircraft. It was a great achievement.
British Airways are making this into a celebration, but actually it's a sad day for aviation. Since the 1970s, it's been possible to cross the Atlantic in a little more than 3 hours. After today, it's going to take the best part of 8. It's going because it's old, expensive to maintain, and its business never recovered from the crash of the Air France Concorde in 2000. But it's a technological marvel that's never been matched. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, on board Concorde.
And here at Heathrow, one aircraft is already on display, waiting for her sister aircraft to come home. And all around the airport, groups of people are gathering to pay their last respects. They're people who marvel at the fact that tons of metal can be made to fly. And above all, they've come to say goodbye to the most challenging, the most remarkable, and the most beautiful passenger plane ever built. Nose down, wings drooping, she almost looks sad herself as she appears on the stage for one last time. But then that familiar roar of defiance and pride for this last performance from the Queen of the Skies. That extraordinary shape that's made her the most famous plane in the world. There's something about it that words can't describe. Her most ardent fans gathered to say goodbye.
It's just something special. Nothing else compares to it.
I feel very sad to see her go. I also feel very privileged that I've had the honour of actually flying on it twice. And that will stick in my mind forevermore. I actually proposed to my wife on Concorde.
She flies. Concorde flies at last.
It's nearly 35 years since Concorde first flew, even if it took another 8 years before services began. Since then, it's set many milestones. British Concordes have made almost 50,000 flights. They've flown 140 million miles. That's 300 return trips to the moon. They've carried more than 2.5 million passengers who've drunk more than 500,000 bottles of champagne. Checking in for the last flight from Heathrow, John Cochrane, test pilot on the very first British flight. Proving Concorde was safe was a huge part of his life.
That's the saddest part, that while you still have an icon of British civil aviation flying, and it's still ahead of the game as far as its technical achievements are concerned, and it has no competitors, it's something this nation has got to be rightly proud of, and yet we're going to terminate it before we have to.
A technological triumph of the 60s, it became a commercial nightmare in the 70s. The original plan was to build 300 planes, but the 1970s oil crisis made her too expensive to fly. There were huge complaints about the noise. At many airports, Concorde was banned. In the end, only 20 were ever built. And then the Paris crash, the terrorist attacks of 9/11, and an aviation slump. Concorde is no longer profitable to fly. So this afternoon, the red carpet for the retirement of the most royal of planes. For millions, the majesty of Concorde will be much missed. And by this evening, there'll be 5 Concordes lined up here with all the passengers off those final flights, the VIPs and the celebrities, for one final farewell party with plenty more of the champagne that's always characterised Concorde, and no doubt a few damp eyes as well.
Simon, we'll see an amazing show this afternoon for what some say, though, is a premature end for Concorde.
Well, it is, Darren, because there had always been hopes that Concorde would fly for another 10 or even 15 years. Don't forget, British Airways spent millions of pounds refitting Concorde after that Paris crash. But then, with the terrorist attacks of 9/11 back in 2001, the huge downturn in aviation, the transatlantic passengers simply disappeared. Concorde wasn't profitable anymore. British Airways was going to have to spend millions more on other extra safety techniques and safety materials, and they eventually decided there was no more money in Concorde. There wouldn't ever be, and Concorde's day had finally come.
All right, Simon, thank you. And there's live coverage of Concorde's last commercial flight as it lands at Heathrow on BBC 2 and BBC News 24 from 3:30 this afternoon. And we'll have more on the end of the era of supersonic flight later in the programme. Up to 15 travel, our correspondent Catherine Marston is at Heathrow's air traffic control now. Catherine, when do we expect air traffic control there behind you to be in touch with the Concorde coming in from New York?
Well, at 3:30 this afternoon, the BBC has been given exclusive access to talk directly to the cockpit of that flight arriving in from New York. That, of course, will all be guided through by the air traffic control team that you can see in the tower behind me. Well, the flight engineer will be able to talk about the journey and the conditions and what has happened on board. And of course, the plane took off 45 minutes ago or so. It's well on its way now. It's about flying at about 60,000 feet. And is supersonic, of course, for the very last time. When we talk to it later on this afternoon at 3:30, it will be about 290 miles off the west coast of the UK. The team here today have drawn lots to decide which of the air traffic controllers will guide that particular flight in. That's been won by Ivor Sims, who just happens to be the air traffic controller that guided the first ever Concorde flight from Heathrow to New York back in 1977 out of Heathrow, and of course now he's guiding it back in. Concorde is expected to cross British land for the first time again at about 3:30 this afternoon.
Catherine, briefly, we know that thousands of people have come to see those final Concorde flights. Give us a sense of the atmosphere there.
Well, here on the air traffic control tower, of course, we have a fantastic view. Let me give you some idea of what you're likely to see if you are here today at Heathrow or able to watch the programmes this afternoon. As you can see, that flight that's coming in, that's exactly where Concorde will appear. This is how she will fly in. There are 3 flights coming in together, and Ivor Sims has told me that the air traffic controller guiding in that New York flight that he will first get to speak to the cockpit when it's just 4 miles away. It should be a very dramatic and impressive sight.
It should be indeed. Catherine, thank you. And a reminder for you that there's live coverage of Concorde's last commercial flight as it lands at Heathrow on BBC 2 and BBC News 24 from 3:30 this afternoon.